Paul Revere was an American colonist who was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1735. He followed in his father's footsteps and became a well-known silversmith. He and his father made beautiful objects such as cups, spoons, tools, teapots, plates, and jewelry. Paul also became an engraver. Through this job, he made illustrations for books, newspapers, and magazines, as well as political posters and cartoons. As Paul grew up, he also learned that many of the colonists did not believe that the government in Great Britain should still rule them. Paul joined a group of men who called themselves the Sons of Liberty. This group believed that the colonies should be free from British rule. In the 1760s and 1770s, the British put taxes on many goods sold in the colonies in order to help raise money. This made the colonists angry because they did not believe that they should have to pay taxes to a government in which they had no representation. Many colonists chose to boycott British goods. In 1773, Paul Revere helped to plan and take part in a protest against the tea tax. He and several other colonists dressed as Native Americans and climbed aboard one of the British ships that had just arrived in the Boston harbor carrying cases of tea. The colonists dumped all of the tea into the harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. This, of course, made the British extremely angry, and as a punishment, they blocked the harbor with warships. Soon after the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere began carrying mail on horseback for leaders of the Massachusetts colony. However, Paul Revere's most important ride took place on the night of April 18, 1775. On this night, British soldiers began marching from Boston toward the towns of Concord and Lexington in hopes of destroying the Patriots' supplies and capturing their leaders. Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott were sent to warn the people in Lexington that the British were coming. Revere began his journey on the night of April 18th by crossing the river between Boston and Charlestown in a rowboat. According to stories that Paul Revere later told his grandchildren, as he made his way from his house to the waterfront, he realized that he had forgotten his spurs. Luckily, his faithful family dog had followed him, so he wrote a note to his wife Rachel asking for the spurs, tied it around the dog's neck, and sent him home. It wasn't long before the dog returned with Paul's spurs. On their way to Charlestown, Paul and his friends had to row right past a British ship, so they placed rags on their oars in order to silence them. This did the trick, and they slipped right past the British ship. Once he crossed the river, Paul Revere saw that there were 2 lanterns hung by patriots in the tower of the Old North Church, which signaled that the British were advancing by rowing across the river. Paul Revere borrowed a horse and made his way towards Lexington, all the while stopping to warn colonists that the British were coming. Just outside of Lexington, British soldiers stopped Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott. While William Dawes and Samuel Prescott escaped, but Paul Revere was not so lucky. The British took his horse and he was forced to walk back to Lexington without his horse, while Dawes and Prescott rode on to Concord. The American Revolution began the next morning when the British soldiers marched into Lexington, but the Patriots were ready. When the war finally ended in 1783, the 13 colonies gained their independence and became the United States of America. Paul Revere participated in the war in a number of different ways, such as fighting as a soldier and printing money for the new country. After the war, he started a new company that made large metal objects such as bells for church towers and copper sheets for ships. He died in 1818 and was not actually famous until 50 years after his death. In the year 1861, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published the poem Paul Revere's Ride, which depicted the exciting ride he took on the night of April 18, 1775, and made him famous forevermore.